Okay, what you're going to learn in this tutorial is how to put animation on your player character. And then what you see down below is our opponent character. You'll learn how to put that basic animation on that character as well. This obstacle here is an impassable obstacle. When we move down next to our opponent character, the AI activates, our opponent character starts chasing after us, starts firing at us. You'll learn how to put the sound effects on for when the opponent character chases after your player character. When our player character gets far enough away from our opponent character, then the opponent character stops searching for our player character. Hi, this is Ali Arango of Game Visuals as well as LittleGuyCGI.com. Today I would like to show you how to set up basic top-down enemy AI in Gdevelop 5. So let's get started. Okay, what you see in front of you is the basic Gdevelop startup screen. I like to start these tutorials from scratch. So the first thing we're going to do is look to our left. See where we see the scenes? We're going to click this plus button here. Then we see new scene. This gray part that lights up right here. We're going to left click right on there. As soon as we do this, we have these options to the right, or this option to the right that says objects. We're going to click the plus button here. We have this new menu here that pops up. We're going to choose for our new object that we want to add, sprite. We're going to left click on this. We're then going to left click in object name. We're going to rename this player. Then what we're going to do is we're going to click this plus button to the right. And then we're going to, where we see animation 0, we're going to, where we see this optional animation name, we're going to type in idle. And what we want to do is bring in an idle frame for this. So we're going to click the plus button here. Then we're going to go to wherever you have the sprite stored at. And I'll make these sprites available to you where you can go to the information section and download these sprites. So we're going to click idle here, click open, and there's our idle. That's fine. So we want to make it so that our player can walk. So we're going to click this plus button to the right. We're going to click this plus button to the left. And then what we're going to do is go to where our other sprites are at. So I have the sprites right here. So what I'm going to do is hold Control, press A. This selects all of these walking sprites. I'm then going to click OK. Now, what I want to do that I have all these sprites right here is I have this thing that says don't loop. I want this to loop, so I'm going to click this. So now this will loop. So this animation will continually play. So with that done, I'm going to click preview. And this lets us see how our speed is for our walk. I want to change the speed to make this slightly faster. So I'm going to change this so that it is 0.05. And then I am going to click apply. Okay, what we're going to do now is bring in our opponent sprite. So we're going to click plus here. We're going to go to sprite. We're going to name this opponent. We're going to click plus. Now what we're going to do here is a little different than what we did before. We're going to name this moving. So there's going to be no idle frame for this. We're going to click plus. We're going to look for where our sprites are at. We're going to, just like before, hold Control, press A, then click open. So now we have all of these sprites right here. What's different about this is we only have the one animation. We're not doing two animations. We're also leaving the speed at 0.08. We are going to click Don't Loop so that this loops, and then we're going to click Apply. So we're going to left click first. So I left click, let my hand off the mouse button. Now I'm left clicking, holding the mouse button, dragging this out. I'm going to left click. Now I can see these squares. I'm going to hold shift, go to this corner while holding shift, shrink this down, aiming for about the size of our player. I'll move this down here like that. Okay, currently we don't have any behaviors on our two objects here, so we're going to click on player. I'm going to double click to go into player, and then here in player I'm going to go to behaviors. Once I did that, you can see this purple line is right underneath behaviors. Now we want to click this plus button to the right. I then want to scroll down to where we see top down movement. I'm going to double click here. I'm fine with how the default settings are for here. I'm then going to click apply. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is left click on opponent, double click to go into our settings for our opponent. I'm going to go to behaviors. Now we can see this purple line underneath behaviors. So what we're going to do is click the plus button to the right here. We're going to go down to pathfinding. So we're going to left click here. We're going to leave our settings at the default settings that they are, with the exception of this max speed. We're going to change this to 100 and then click apply. Okay, so now we're going to click play. And we can see our opponent is animating. Our player character is moving like they should. However, they are not animating. And this is because we have to set this up. The reason why this opponent character is animating is because we only have one animation for this, and that is what normally would be the idle animation. So this doesn't need to set up, and that's, I had told you that this was going to be a little different from that. That's why we, as far as going through the tutorial, it's easier to work with how things are with having this already be set up to animate. So everything is working as it should for what we currently have set up. We need to set up the animation to work with our player character. Okay, here in Gdevelop, where we set up our art is here, where we set up our actual programming, and we're doing visual programming here with Gdevelop 5. This is where we set up our visual programming. So we're going to left click here. We see this, there are no events. The way we get events is by clicking this button here. So now with just by clicking this button, we have a position set up for us to set up conditions as well as actions. So a condition as well as an action is one event. The conditions basically say when something happens to do something, and then actions say what to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to click add condition, and what we're setting up now is for our player character to animate when we move the character. So we're going to scroll down, and what we want to look for is top-down movement. We're going to left-click here, and then where we see this movement and then is moving, we're going to left-click is moving. We're going to select our player, and then we're going to select OK. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to make, this is an event, we want to make a sub-event. A sub-event is dependent on this. A lot of times you don't need to make sub-events. You can just make other events. It's just more convenient. So to make a sub-event, we're going to make sure that we have this blue line here clicked on. So if I click here, see how there's no blue line there? But when I click here, there is a blue line here. All right, so you want this blue line, and you want to click this second button right here. See, it says add a sub-event to the selected event. So we're going to click there to add a sub-event. So what we want to do now is we want to go to add condition. we want to go down to keyboard, and then we're going to go to key pressed. Okay, so now we see this test if a key is pressed. We're going to click here. We're going to hold shift and then press L, and then type EFT, and we're going to left click on left. We could have pressed enter as well. We're then going to click OK. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that when the left key is pressed, our animation plays. We're going to do that by using the animation name. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to go back to where we work on our art, which is here. We're going to click on our player and then double click to go into the player. So see we have this animation 1, which is this idle animation. And we have this walk right here, but for our animation name, we don't have a name. So what we're going to do is we're going to left click here, and then we're going to type in walk. We're then going to click apply. Okay, so now that we have that done, what we're going to do is go back to our programming here. We're going to click add action. We're going to go to sprite, animations and images, and then we're going to select change the animation by name. That's the way we needed a name. So we're going to left click here. We're going to go to, for our object, select player, and then for our animation name, this is the name that we put in. So what we want to do is hold shift, put quotations down. This is important. Make sure that you put the name that we put in, which if you followed right along with me is walk. So with the walk in between those two quotations, we're then going to click OK. Okay, so with that done, when we click the preview button, you'll see that when I press right, we don't have our animation. However, when I press left, our character is animating. And really, what we need is just have our character stop animating. So what I'm going to do is click this X button to get out of here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click play. So when we press the right key, the down key, the up key, we don't have our animation. However, when we press the left key, we do have our animation. When we stop pressing the left key, our player character keeps moving. So we want to make it so when the player character isn't moving, that the player goes back to their idle animation. Okay, so in the past I had shown how to do a top-down player walking animation and how to set up the programming for that. And what I did was I did the same setup, and then I had a left key like you see here, and then I had right key, up key, down key. We actually don't need that. So what we can do is we can double click here. And what we can do is we have our options here. We selected key pressed. We can actually go to any key pressed. So we'll left click there, and then we'll just click OK. Okay, so when we press any key, our character will now start their walking animation. Now we need to set up things so that when the character, our player character, isn't walking, they go to their idle animation. So we're going to click here. So we have this blue line highlighted underneath, where you see players moving, as well as add an action. Then we're going to click this add an event button. We're then going to go to add condition. We're going to go to top-down movement. We're going to select is moving, like before. We're then going to select player. However, this time we're going to click invert condition, and then I'm going to click OK. Okay, so we have this player is moving set for our condition. Now what we want to do is click add action. We want to go to sprite. We want to go to animations and images. And then we want to go to change the animation by name. We're going to select player. Then we're going to click here, put in quotation, idle, then quotation. Then we'll click OK. Okay, now when we click play, click this to maximize our view. Now when we push a button, our player walks. Then when they stop, they go to their idle animation. Okay, now that we have that set up, pretty much our programming for our player is done. So I click this button just to hide some of the visual coding there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our new scene. We're going to go to our opponent. I'm going to left click. I'm then going to left click on these three dots right here. And then what we're going to do is go to Edit Object Variables. We're going to left click here. This panel pops up. We're going to click this plus button to the right. We see variable here. We're going to change this to CU, one word. And then for the setting here, we're going to change this to 0. Then we're going to click Apply. Okay, with that set up, let's go back to our visual programming. So what we want to do now is we're going to make sure we have highlighted. We can see like this blue line underneath, the whole event there. So now we're going to click this button right here. What we're going to do now is we're about to add a condition and add an action. And this is where we're first starting to work on our actual enemy AI. Okay, so for this first condition, we're going to select Add Condition. And then what we're going to do is go to Common Conditions for All. Now, before I click this, we're going to work with variables. There's multiple types of variables. So you can see this variables right here. So if I click here, see this says global variables, value of a scene variable, text of a scene variable. You do not want this. Even though this is very close to where you see common conditions for all, we see variables. You don't want this variables right here. And this is the variables you see before I click here. Now I'm going to click here. Now when I click here, all of this opens up, right? You're going to scroll down and you see this variables looks just like the other ones. However, this is the value of an object's variable. So just be careful about that. So what you're going to do is you're going to left click on value of an object's variable. This is the opponent's variable. So you're going to left click on opponent. And then you're going to click here to select the variable. So we're going to select CU. This is the variable that we made up for our opponent. I'm going to left click to get away from that. We're going to click here. And then we're going to select equal to. When I click down here, this changed to invert condition. We don't want this. That happened when I click down. That happens, to be careful of that as well. And for this setting, we want to change this to 1. So then we're going to click OK. Okay, so what's going on here is we're saying, look, when the variable of the opponent, remember we went to opponent, we went to the right, we clicked the three dots, we made a variable named CU, and we set that to 0. So we're saying that variable, think of it as a container of information, when that variable is equal to 1. So here we're not saying, how this gets to 1, but we're saying when it is equal to 1, we want you to do this. And that's what we're about to do now. Okay, so we're going to go to Add Action. We're going to look for pathfinding behavior, which is here. We're going to go down to move to a position. So we say move the object to a position. So this is the object that we want to move is our opponent. So now we have this, okay, what's the position you want to move to, right? So we click here. Sometimes when you click in Gdevelop, you'll see like an option there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click here. We're going to go up to Common Expressions for All Objects. Click there. Then we're going to go to Position. Then we're going to select X position. We're going to click here. We want player because we want our opponent to move towards the player. So we're going to left click here. Then we're going to click Done. Okay, so now what we want to do with this is we're going to press the space key. We're going to enter a plus. We're going to press the space key again. Don't be concerned with that. Now we're going to click on the blue button again. We're going to scroll up. We're looking for random. We're going to select random. Then we're going to select random integer. So we're going to click here. And then what we want for this is we want to enter a setting of 50. So then we're going to click done. Then I'm going to left click off of there. So now what we have is this is asking for, this being Gdevelop is asking for everything for this, however, it's set to Y. So what we can do is we can just highlight this. I just left clicked and held and dragged over that. I'm going to hold Control C, left click here, right click, and then select paste. So we have the same code here. Now what we need to do is click here, change this to capital Y. It's important, capital Y. So now with capital Y, that should be good. Now we'll click OK. Okay, so we have this here, which says when this variable is equal to 1, this is the variable we made up connected to the opponent, do this. However, when we made this variable, and this is the variable of opponent, we set this to be equal to 0. So we didn't tell this variable when to change to 1. We're just saying like when it's equal to 1, do this. However, because we're not changing it to equal 1, it's just going to stay 0, which is what we made it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to set that up now. So with this highlighted blue, you can see like this is outlining this. We're going to click this add an event button. We're then going to click add condition. We're going to go to common conditions for all, position. Then we're going to select distance between two objects. We're going to left click here. And then what we're going to do is select the opponent for the first object, the second object, the player. And then for the distance between the two objects, we're going to set this for 200. So with that setting there, we're going to click OK. So now we're saying when the distance of the player is below 200 pixels, when the opponent's distance to the player is below 200 pixels, do something. And what we want that something to be for it to do is we want that something to be that variable that we set up to be equal to 0, we want that to be equal to 1. So guess what? Once that equals 1, then this activates where our opponent will say, oh, equal to 1. Okay, now I'm going to move towards the player. So this almost reminds me of like when I was a kid, we used to play a game, green light, red light. You know, you would hold up a green light, you would go. Red light, you would stop. That's kind of what like the variable is right here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just change. We're going to tell Gdevelop that when this happens to change this CU variable to 1, because right now it's set for 0, which is what we made it at. Okay, so I'm going to click add action, common conditions for all, and then we're going down to variables. So when we click that, we see this. We want modify the variable of an object. We're going to left click here. The variable that we're talking about is the variable that we made called CU that is connected to this object variable, opponent variable, right? We're going to click here. This is the variable CU. And then we're going to click equal to, and we want this to be set to 1. So now we're going to click OK. So basically we're saying when the opponent's distance to the player is below 200, change the CU variable to 1. Once the opponent sees that its variable has been changed to 1, which we have this set up, then this happens here. Okay, so let's test this out. So I'll maximize this. So our opponent is, down near the bottom. So we're moving near the top. So when we start to get close to that opponent, it should start to chase after us. Up, and there you go. So now the opponent is after us, which is what we want. Okay, so our opponent chases after us. However, that AI is very simple. Let's make it so that if we get a far enough distance away from the opponent stops chasing us. So how we do that? Okay, we want to make sure we have this highlighted here, right? Because I'm going to show you how to do that now. We're going to click the plus button to make a new event. When I say this here and you're like, why does he keep saying that? It's because if we don't do it, we'll make a sub event. We can make a sub event when we don't want to. So anyway, what we want to do is we want to have this set up so that this works from when we get far enough away, something happens. And when that something happens is we're going to change our variable. We're going to control things that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to click add a condition, common condition for all. We're going to go to position. We're going to select distance between two objects. We're going to select the opponent. Then object 2, we're going to select the player. And then for the distance, we're going to change this to 300. Now this, what we want here is we want this to be not below, but actually above 300. So in other words, we get enough space between, and I might have misspoke before, if we get enough space between us and the opponent, we want our opponent to stop chasing us. So to do that, right now this is set so when it's under 300, this will chase us. That's what makes the opponent chase us in the first place, this condition. So what we're going to do is we're going to invert this. So now when the distance is more than 300, we're going to make something happen, okay? So this one, when we're below 200, we have all this set up and the opponent chases us. This one is we're setting up so that when you're more than 300 pixels away, we make something happen. And that's something that we want to happen eventually. We want to be for the opponent to stop chasing us. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to make things so that we're going to set things up so our variable changes. So how we're going to do that? We're going to go to action, click add action. We're going to go to common actions for all objects. We're going to go down to variables. We're going to select modify a variable of an object. We're going to select opponent. We're going to click variable, select CU for our variable. We're going to click equal to, and then for this setting, we're going to make this be 0. And then we're going to click OK. Okay, so we're like, when you're more than 300, when the opponent is more than 300 pixels away from the player, change our variable to be equal to 0. So with this blue line here, that's good. That's what we want. We're going to click to make a new event. And then for this new event, what we want to do is select add action, go to common condition for all objects. We want to go down to variables. The value of an object's variable is what we want to select. It's the opponent's variable. It's the CU variable that we want to work with. The sign of the test is equal to. And then this setting is going to be 0. So then we're going to click OK. Okay, so we're saying when this variable CU is equal to 0, we want something to happen. So we're going to set what we want to happen. And what we want to happen is for our opponent to stop. So we're going to click add action. We're going to go to common action for all, movement, and then we're going to select stop the object. The object that we want to stop is the opponent. So then, and I just left clicked here just to get away from that menu. I'm then going to click OK. Okay, so let's test this out and see if this works. We're going to click preview, maximizing this just by pushing that square so we'll stay near the top. Make sure that our opponent character is not chasing us. It isn't. So now we'll go in the distance. Opponent character sees us. I'm purposely letting it stay close. Now I'm going to outrun it. Try to outrun it. And now there you go. When I got enough distance, our opponent character stopped chasing us, and that's exactly what we want to happen. I'm just going to click here, X to get out of that preview. Okay, so our opponent character is working well. However, let's make it so our opponent character can attack. So what we're going to do is make it so that our opponent character doesn't just chase our player character, but can actually shoot at our player character. So we're going to go to New Scene, and we need to make a bolt, something that the opponent character will actually be firing at our player character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this plus button here to the right. I'm going to select Sprite. I am going to name this Bolt. I'm then going to click the plus button here. I'm then going to select Edit with Piskel. This is Gdevelop's built-in graphic editor. And what we want to do now is we want to resize this area right here. So I click this, and I'm going to click this again. And then what I'm going to do now is where we see 64 by 64 here, I'm going to click this. I'm going to change this width to 10. And then for this height, I'm going to click here. I'm going to change the height to 5. And then what I'm going to do is click resize. So now we've resized this area right here. And then now with this area resized, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here, and then I'm going to make this bolt be orangish color. So I'm going to click here and drag, and then I'm going to go to this paint bucket here. I'm going to left click here. This doesn't have to be changed, by the way. We could leave this name be new object. It's fine. I'm just choosing to rename this bolt. Again, this is an unnecessary thing I'm doing right here. So with this made, I'm going to click Save. And then with this here set up, this is fine how everything is here. I'm then going to click Apply. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click on our opponent here. We're going to double click. And what we need to do is add a point for our bolt to come out of our opponent character here. So I'm going to click Edit Points. And then I'm going to scroll down. This is important that these are both blue, that these are both turned on. So share same points for all animations is turned on, as well as share same points for all sprites of this animation. These need to be turned on. So what we have here is right here, as well as right here, are the origin point of this sprite is right here. The center point is right here. What we're going to do is we're going to add a new point. We're going to do that by clicking this plus button to the right. So I'm just going to put an S in front of this. This stands for shooting point. And when I go here, we don't see any point there. What we're going to do is we're going to put in 90 as well as 90. And the only reason we're putting those numbers in is so we can see our point. Okay, so here's our point right here. So I want this point to, and this is our S point, by the way. It's kind of difficult to see. I'm left clicking and dragging this point. In Gdevelop, by the way, your characters, you pretty much want to make them so they especially a top down, that they face to the right. So I'm thinking I want the bolt to come from right around here. So this is where I have this S point that you see here. So here's the S point right here, and our bolt should come from this area here. So with that done, I'm going to click, actually, so this is S capital P point, because we need to know, how this is written out here. I'm going to click Close. And then with that done, I'm going to click Apply. Okay, so since we have this bolt made, what we want to do is go to New Scene and Events. And what we want to do is we want our opponent character to shoot. So we can use this, or this condition as well as this action is set up, we can connect our shooting to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to left click here. So we have this blue that goes under our condition as well as our action. We're going to click sub event. So now we have this sub event here that will be connected to what happens here. So this sub event will be dependent upon this condition here. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make the bolt appear on that S point that we made. So what we're going to do is go to add action. We're going to go to common action for all object. And then we're going to select right here where we see create an object. So we're going to left click here. And then we see create an object at the specified position. So we want to choose the object that's going to appear, right? So what's the object that we want to appear? That's the bolt. So we're going to left click on the bolt. So then we have here this X position here. So what we want is we want this to appear at the opponent. So when we left click here, sometimes you'll see options pop up here, so the option doesn't pop up. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this blue button here. We're going to go to common actions for all. We're going to go to position. We're going to scroll down till we see X position. Now we're going to left click here. We can see the options here. We're going to select opponent. So with that, we're going to click done. And then with that, what we have is we have this code that is written out for us here. So what we want to do now is we want to, okay, yeah, we have the X position. We want the same thing for our Y position here. So we can either copy and paste this, or we can copy this and paste this to here. Well, for this time, since last time we copied and pasted, we'll go back in. It can be either or. So we'll click here. We'll go to common expressions for all objects. We'll go to position. We'll go to this time Y position. We'll click here, select opponent, and then we'll click done. Okay, so we have the X position as well as the Y position. So we do need something else, and what we need is this point here. We need to put this in these parentheses right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put quotation. The reason why we put quotation is because this is something that we came up with. We named our thing S point. So we're going to put in S, capital P, point, and then quotation. We're going to do the same thing here. Quotation, S, capital P, put in the rest of point. So it says S point, quotation. So we have our opponent dot X, and these are both capitals, by the way. Quotations, S point here, as well as right here. So this is good with both of these settings being set here. So then we'll click OK. Okay, what we need to do now is set things up so that the angle of our bolt changes with the angle of our opponent. So we'll do that now. So we'll click add action. We'll go to common action for all objects. We'll scroll down till we see angle. We'll then select angle again. We'll select bolt. So we're saying change the angle of the rotation of an object. That object is bolt. We'll click equals to. And then when we click here, we won't see an option. So what we're going to do is go to the blue button. We're going to scroll all the way up. We're going to go to common expressions for all objects. We're going to select angle again. We'll click here, and then we're going to select opponent. Then we're going to select done. So with all of that done, you'll see this. I click here. We don't see that anymore. I was talking about those red letters. I'm going to click OK. So now we are set up. So this is going to make it so that when our opponent is aiming in a direction, the angle will also aim, the angle of the bolt will be that same angle of the opponent. So that's how the opponent can move. And then with this next action that we're going to add, the bolt will actually shoot in the direction that the opponent is aiming. Okay, so now we need to have it so the bolt actually shoots. The way we're going to do that is we're going to add a force to the bolts. We're going to click here. We're going to go to Common Action for all objects. We're going to go to Movement. We're going to select Add a Force Angle. We're going to left click on that. And we see this says Add a force to the object. The object will move according to all the forces it has. This action creates the force using the specified angle and length. So the object that we want to move is the bolts. We're going to select bolt. Where we have this angle, we're going to click here. We're going to scroll up. We're going to select common expressions for all objects. We're going to select angle again. We're going to click here and then select opponent. So then we're going to click done. And then for the speed, we want this to be 300. Where we see this instant, we want to change this to permanent. So we'll left click here. You can see this permanent is now highlighted blue since we selected it. We're then going to click OK. Okay, so let's test this out. So I just click the preview button to come in here. So now I'm near the top. The opponent doesn't see me yet. So now when I come down, now the opponent sees me. Actually, he looks kind of cool, but that's not what we want. Actually, he looks pretty cool. It's too much, though. So when I get a farther enough distance away, the opponent should stop, and there the opponent stops. However, we want to have the bolt come out in a more controlled fashion. Okay, so how do we control the bolt? We do that with a timer. So we have all of these actions set up. Let's go to condition. We're going to click add condition. And then what we're looking for timers and times. We're going to left click here. And then we want value of a scene timer. We're going to left click here. The time in seconds, we want a bolt to come out every second. So I'm going to click 1. Now we need to put a name for this timer. I'm going to name this shoot timer. So I'm going to put quotations here since we're choosing the name. So now we have a timer named shoot timer. So then I'll click OK. Okay, now we need to, so basically every second a bolt will come out, right? However, we need to have this actual timer reset. So let's see, I'll click play right now. We'll go in range. You see it doesn't, we're like, okay, it is shooting every second. The timer is, it's not activating correctly. To make this work correctly, we need to reset the timer. There we go. Got enough distance away from him. So we'll just add an action in to reset the timer. So I'm going to click add action. Timers and time. Start or reset a scene timer. I'll left click there. The name is shoot timer. So with that name, we'll click OK. Okay, so now we'll try this again. And just click the preview button. And now you can see every second there's only one bolt coming out. And that's what we want. Okay, the reason why we set up our opponent to have a path finding abilities for this next thing that I'm going to show you. So we're going to go to new scene. We're going to go to this plus to the right. We're going to click there. We're going to select sprite. We're going to click here. We're going to name this obstacle. We're going to click this plus to the right. We're going to click edit with Piskel. We're going to keep the same color. We're going to go to this paint bucket. Click here. So everything's staying the same. This part here we don't have to do. I'm just choosing to do this. So then we'll select save. For the behaviors, we're going to click here. We can see this purple line underneath behaviors. We're going to click this plus button here. Now we're going to scroll down to obstacle for pathfinding. So we're going to left click here, leave this as it is, and then click apply. Okay, so we're going to left click on obstacle. You can tell it's selected because it's highlighted blue. We're going to left click and drag. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to click this square here, drag this out, pull this over here. I'm going to click this button here to launch a preview. I'm going to click this button here to maximize. So now when we get close enough, our opponent character chases after me. And we'll even change directions to try to chase after me, but the opponent is reacting to the obstacle. The opponent character is going around the obstacle and changing based on the obstacle. Still, if I get far enough away, the opponent character will stop. However, our player character, I'll go down so you can see it, can go right through the obstacle. And we don't want that. Okay, so let's set it up so that the player character can't go through the obstacle. So we're going to select new scene events. We're going to not click there. See, when I click here, you only see the blue there. You want the blue around this whole thing, so you're going to click here. Now you can see the blues around everything. Now you're going to click new events. You're going to go to add condition, common conditions for all, collision, collision again. You're going to select player for the first object. For the second object, you're going to select obstacle. And then now we're going to come down, and I'm about to click OK. So now I'm going to click OK in a second. Okay, so now we have this set up. The player is in collision with the obstacle. Now we have to set up to say what happens when a player is in collision with the obstacle. Okay, so what we want to happen is for the player not to go through the obstacle. So to do that, we're going to click Add Action, Common Actions for All. We're going to go down to Position. We're going to scroll down. We're going to select Separate Two Objects. It's important that the first object is the movable object, which is our player. So we're going to left click there. The second object is our obstacle. And then we're going to click OK. Okay, so now with that done, we'll click the preview button. I'm going to maximize our preview. So now when I get close, our player activates. However, I cannot go through now, which is what we want. I can't go through the obstacle now. So I'm going to click this X to get out of here. Okay, so what if you want to have sound when your opponent fires? So we have all this set up here. When our opponent is less than 200 pixels from our player, the opponent starts to fire. We can use this to fairly easily put a sound to go along with our fire. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here. See this blue outline here. Now we're going to click not event, but sub event. We're going to go to add action. We're then going to go to audio. We're going to scroll down to play a sound. Left click there. We're then going to go to this paintbrush. Click here. Select these words here. This takes us into Gdevelop's built-in sound editor. We have these options here. We can click laser shoot. That gave us a decent laser sound. We'll click here. We'll name this bolt. Fire sound. This is unnecessary, by the way. I'm just putting this in there, but you don't have to do this. I'll click save. I'm going to click no. This is where we can set our volume. I'm going to change this to 1. Just because I'm putting on 1 where this says 0 to 100. You might say, well, why 1? This is fairly loud, so right now, so I'm going to set that to 1. Seems to be pretty decent. I'm then going to click OK. Okay, so now we need to have a timer that matches this timer. So what we're going to do is go to Add Condition. We're going to go to Timers and Time. We're going to select Value of a Scene Timer. We're going to choose 1 second because this matches up with our other timer. We need a new timer, a second timer. So we're going to name this Sound. Then we're going to click OK. Okay, so we need one more thing. You see where we have this timer here and we have reset the timer, reset the shoot timer. We're going to need the same thing here. So we're going to click Add Action, Time and Timers. Then we're going to go to Start or Reset a Scene Timer. We're going to click here. And we're going to enter in the name of our timer that's associated with our sound, which is Sound. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, we're going to click the preview button. I'm going to click the maximize button. Okay, and it works. Sound is kind of low. I'm going to click the X button to get out of this preview. Okay, so I'm going to go to this where we have play the sound. I'm going to double click here. I'm going to take this sound to 5. Click OK. Then I'm going to click the preview button. Then I'm going to click the maximize button. Okay, that's better. Okay, I'm going to click this X button to get out of that preview. Okay guys, that's it for that tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel, reshare them. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe and thank you for viewing.